Hello weekend warriors, welcome back to the workshop. As promised in the last video, today we're going to talk about box joint jigs. Now I have two box joint jigs. The one on my left here can be used with a router or a table saw with a dado blade set in it. But since our saw crate will not accommodate a dado blade set, the shank on the saw just isn't long enough to accommodate the number of blades. We're going to pretty well stick to a router with it. The other one, we can go either way. Saw table, router, it doesn't matter. But today we're going to pretty well just demonstrate it using the saw table. They are both basically based on the same design, the same basic framework, and then how they're set up afterward makes the difference. So, doing this video, this is a whole bunch of different videos. I've worked for days just doing cuts and demos and stuff like that, and not all the footage came out great, so this is going to be a pretty good mashup of what I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 days. So first we're going to revisit how I attach the miter runners to the box frames, and then we're going to take kind of a look at the basic setup of both jigs, and then we'll look at demos on both jigs. Now the demo for this jig just didn't come out at all, so we're going to shoot that one fresh today too, so you'll get to see it kind of live. So yeah, we'll get started on that. Let me grab my other little camera and do the tour while you guys watch the setup video. So hang on. Okay, here I have my router plate with my router mounted. And mounting it up was easy as pie because most routers come with a foot plate or a mounting plate. And all I did was mark off a center in the plate, in the crate plate. I took the foot plate and kind of centered it up on the lines that I drew. And then I drilled my holes. Of course, I countersunk those holes down in, so number one, the mounting screws that came with the router will reach. And number two, they're recessed so I don't hit them when I'm trying to slide anything over the table. You'll see on this one that I've also already set up to accept the 1/4-inch bolts. So I set this plate up just like I did the previous one, meaning that I took a spacer, stuck it in, lined up the edges. I used the other plate to make sure my holes would line up in the right places, and then I drilled them in, I lined them up, and now all I have to do is sink the bolts in. Alright, now our router is installed. Now we've got a router table. So now we can start talking about the box joint jigs. Now you might recall in the last video I mentioned all the box joint jigs, or most of the jigs we're going to talk about, is based on the same design as our rip fence. And that is, it's a basic box. You've got a base, you got a fence front, and they're just butted up against each other and screwed together. You can nail them, you can glue them, you can do whatever you need to do just to make sure they're secured, not going anywhere. Now, whether the supports are inset, as they are on the fence here, or whether they're put on the outside, it's still the same design. So, what makes the jig different from the fence? Well, a runner for the miter slot. And we're going to attach this runner just like we did for the rip fence alignment gauge, in that we're going to decide where the runner will go on the fence, and in this case I'm just checking, getting this thing centered up on the table, and then marking the miter slot. Now, do I have to be exactly on? No, not at this point. This is just sort of a rough measurement. And there I've got an inside edge. And now I'm just going to take my square and give myself a line there. Matter of fact, I'm going to leave my square on board. And now I'll swing this thing around just to make it a little bit easier on me. And once again, normally I would just line it up square like this. I would either use glue and brads or staples or something. I would secure it to the base of the box. In this case today, since I'm probably going to end up taking this one apart, I'm going to just add a couple of drops of hot glue right now, just so you get the idea of how we go about doing this. Okay, so make sure I'm square with the face, make sure I'm square with the back, this being the face here. All right. So now that runner is square with the face in the miter slot. Now you notice this thing is kind of long. Okay, we've got quite a bit of a torque arm out here, so we're going to give it a little bit of more support by adding another runner. And this runner is pretty easy. I've marked off where I want the back edge to line up with, right there. And once again, I would lay down a stream of wood glue with 2 drops of hot glue. I'd have it set up so it sticks to the box while I pick it up and allows me to secure it. So in this case, I'm not going to put the wood glue down. I'm just going to put down a couple drops of hot glue. I make sure the hot glue is well melted. There we go. And now I've got a lot of support. It's not going to torque off on me. And now there's the basic difference between it being a fence and being prepared to be turned into a working jig. Okay, in front of us here we have our 2 box joint jigs. This is the one for use mostly with the router, in our case, because we can't use a dado set with this saw. And this one we can work either way. Router or the saw. But for today we're just going with the saw on this guy. Alright, so this is a faithful old design. It is not my design. As a matter of fact, neither one of these are actually my design. But it's a design that works, and I can't remember exactly who I got it from, so I can't give them credit, but if you look on YouTube, you'll find both of these designs done in various different ways. Okay, but they're all based on, or they're both based on, the same box, just like the rip fence. Okay? It is a butt joint for the base and the faceplate with 2 supports. In this case, they're out on the end. The length of the support can vary depending on what you're doing with it. Now, in this case, I put myself a little stop out here so my workpiece could go up against the stop. Of course, I have 2 runners for fitting in the miter slots. Then I have a pin inset into what is a removable faceplate. So I can change sizes of box joints. In this case, I've got it set up for a 3/8 box joint. So if you look, now let me bring it up here a little bit so you can see it a little bit, or let me come down to it. Okay, if you look, there's a slot where the router bit cuts through. Then there's an equal size slot, or pin, basically a blank space, in between, and then the pin. So basically, the first cut, you're butting the piece up against the pin, cutting, which is going to leave a pin for the joint. So you're going to leave a pin and cut a slot. Then you're going to move the slot onto this pin here, this positioning pin, which is going to allow you to do the same thing. So you'll leave a pin and cut a slot each time. and you'll see how that works in the demo. Now, how I set that up, well, let me show you some video on how I set that up. All right, here's the sled that we made. On the front, I've clamped a new faceplate. Now, this faceplate is what we're going to mount on here permanently, so I'm going to go ahead and mount it up permanently right now. Now that it's cleanly mounted, I'm going to unmount it. Because this is a box joint jig, I've got to have an offset in order to put my box guide. So with that offset, since I'm using the 3/8 bit, I've got two 3/8 setup bars here that I'm going to stick down into place, because one of these setup bars will provide a guide pin. The second one provides me the space between the bit and the guide pin. So now that I'm offset properly to the side, I can bring my clamps back in. Make sure everything's square here before I go. Make sure I've got my two pins in snug. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut myself my 3/8 1/2 inch deep guide pin. And believe it or not, even losing that chunk, it worked out well enough. So now, with the two pins out, I move it over, and now I have a perfect 3/8 space between where my bit's going to cut and my pin, my guide pin. All right, so you saw the video, and we'll do a demo in just a moment, but let's take a look at this box joint. Jig, I should say. Box joint jig. Now, this is what we call a screw advance box joint jig. It is still the same basic box with a face. I just don't have a removable face. Well, I kind of do, because it has a carriage on it. And that carriage rides on the top of the fence and is controlled by this 3/8 piece of all thread that goes all the way through. And it's 16 turns per inch, so one turn is 1/16 of an inch. And you can do the math from there for the rest of it. Okay, in the carriage, and the carriage is nothing more than sandwiched pieces of wood, okay? I've got my faceplate, I've got my carriage rider, and then I've got the two pieces that the bolt rides through. And there's no measuring involved. It's all the same thickness as the box. So it's just, we're cutting the pieces to size. All right. Now, in the carriage, you see I've inset a nut. And that's just a 3/8 standard nut. Inside the carriage, I've drilled a 5/8 inch hole and just pressed the nut in with some glue. And there it stays, there it holds. Now, I did mess up. Okay, where was I? I was saying that I messed up, and this nut is supposed to be on the other side, but when I drilled it in the wrong spot. But with the glue in place, it seems to be holding just fine, and it's working just great. Okay, on each end, I've got a set of lock nuts. You can ignore this. This is just something I was playing with. It's a gear from my old screw advance box joint. But I kind of use it to adjust the tension on the screw.
Inside, I've got 2 lock nuts, so when I decide where my 0 point is, I can lock those down about an 1/8 turn away. So I know when I hit that stop, I just need to go back an 1/8 turn and I'm at 0. Then on the other side, I also have my lock nuts sandwiched around a handle for making the adjustments. Okay, so there is 0, 1/8 turn back. It's now at cutting 0. And I'll demonstrate how to use that here in just a little bit. All right, so that's the anatomy. So now, let's see how I set this one up, and let's take some video of it making some good box joints. So I'll be back. All right, so we're ready to start with our first piece. And the initial cut is always the important one because you got to get it exactly right. Well, because my pin is set up exactly one pin space over from the blade, when I butt that up, that is going to give me one perfect space. So I'm going to start with a pin and cut the slot. I'm going to leave a pin and cut the slot. Okay, so here's my first half, and I start with a pin. Now, on the mating half, I have to start with a slot. So I'm going to use that first pin to fill the gap between the blade and the next board. So when I put the next board down and start to cut, I'm going to start with a slot. So here we go. Alright, I dropped my pieces and I broke a piece off of this one. But, on the whole, we can take those pieces and work them together. They're very snug, very tight. And you see, we come out with a real nice, real snug joint. I guess I can fit those together too. So this is a real nice working jig with solid wood and with a router. Now I can't really use this jig with the saw crate and the circular saw installed because this type of jig would require dado bits, and circular saws don't do dado bits. You just don't have enough shank to put more than one blade onto a circular saw. So for our router table, this is great. It's simple. If I wanted to change sizes, all I would have to do is change the front fence face and set it up just like we did in the video, using the proper spacing out on the edge. It's a great little jig. However, like I said, in our application, it's only usable with the router table. Now, that's great. If you're using solid wood, this is wonderful. However, it doesn't work so well with thin plywood. if I come over here, here's a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. And so let me set it up to go. And just for argument's sake, I'm even going to put a front piece on it. Because there might be somebody out there saying, well, it will work fine if you put a front piece on it. Well, number one, I'd have to use a second piece of wood. Number two, you see, using a front piece becomes a bit of a hassle. You're using more wood. You can't use the front piece afterward because you tear the heck out of it with the router bit. And even when you use the front piece, there's a chance that you're going to lose layers within the piece of wood that you're wanting to work with anyway. So for using solid wood on a router, this will work great. However, using thinner plywoods, not so much. Okay, now we've seen how good the other box joint jig works with a router. Now let's see how well this one works with the saw in place. Now I've already got this saw adjusted for the thickness of the material I'm going to be cutting. So what you have to do is figure out how thick the material is and then just adjust this up for that height. That way your box joints end up flush. All right, now in setting this guy up, I made my initial setup cut at 3/8 from the edge. And then I went progressively and I made cuts until I had a 3/8 slot. And that told me how many turns on the handle I would need to make a perfect 3/8 slot, because my blade is not perfectly 1/8, it's not perfectly 1/16. It's about 3/32 or maybe 7/64 of an inch wide. I can't see that small, so I kind of had to play it by ear and take a shot. If it was a perfect 1/8 blade, then each one of these slots would have been 2 turns on the handle. So 2 turns equals an 1/8 on a 16-turn spindle. So total of 6 turns to make the slot. But you also have to account for each edge of the blade. So my initial cut took this portion of the blade into account, the inside. So that gave me the cut on the farthest inside. Now my last cut had to be on this edge of the blade. That's why it works best, these kind of joints work best with the dado blade on a saw, because they cut both edges at the same time. This one, you got to cut each edge separately. So you have to calculate how many turns it takes to do that. And then I advanced the jig, so I had a 3/8 pin in between. So that tells me how many in between turns I need. So I came up to about 4.5 turns for each slot or each tail, and then 7 turns for each pin. That would bring the inside edge of the blade back to the 3/8 point here. And so with that knowledge in mind, I was able to start cutting some pins and some tails and pieces of wood. And also I lined up a block here. This is just glued into place with hot glue. And it is lined up on the exact edge of this tail here. So when I butt my piece up against it, the first thing I'm going to cut is a tail, not a pin.
All right. Here we go. Okay, at this point it doesn't hurt to take a 3/8 setup stick and check all your joints and make sure you're pretty much in the right ballpark on all of them, and I definitely am. So now I'm ready to make the other side. Okay. Now I could sit here and turn the hurdy-gurdy all the way back. Or I can take my variable speed drill with a socket on it and work it out slowly here. Let's make sure I've got it tight in there though. Being sure to stop before you get to the end stop. Okay, now on this piece, I want to leave a pin first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a pin put in and butt up against that pin. So now I've got my 3/8 space. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this guy out. 7 4 3/4 is 11 3/4 turns. $11 3/4. Okay, and where's my clamp that I just had? Put it way over here. I'm going to get that pin out of the way. Now if you see, you'll notice, I'll go ahead and put the 3/8 pin back in here. And if you could see real up close, you would see with that blade up against my pin and up against the edge, it meets perfectly. So now it's all over but the cutting. don't know why I'm always so surprised when things work out for the camera, like these joints did. But I'm always happy, and maybe that's why I do these videos. Anyway, you've now seen two good designs for box joint jigs. Like I said, you don't have to take these two designs. There's designs all over the internet. Some of them a little bit more simple than these. A couple of them more complex. You want to see an excellent engineering model, go to woodengears.ca. Matthias, he does some wonderful work, and I will always sing his praises because he's such a great woodworker. So there we have it. The objective of this video is done. Next video, we get to start making something for the house. Something useful, something that, well, at least my wife liked it. And it's a throwback to the late 70s and early 80s that I think is making a good comeback now, and it's worth doing if you're limited on space. So, until we get to work on that, y'all keep up the good fight, and I'll see you next time. Bye.